Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this session with the three very phenomenal authors on this panel. I'm going to start immediately to my left, Busisekile Khumalo, whose new book is Rubies and Rain, with this beautiful cover. Busisekile, I'm sure you need no introduction, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about her anyhow. She's the best-selling author of by now 10 books, which is quite an accomplishment. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Including the Harvard Wife series. She has chosen to pursue her career in writing, as born out of her love for books, over her profession of law. This novel, Rubies and Rain, actually picks up where the previous one ended, Shadows and Sunshine. And I was lucky enough to interview Busisekile on Shadows and Sunshine last year in this space. But just to say, for those of you who are interested in buying this, you don't actually necessarily, it helps if you read Shadows and Sunshine first, but you don't have to. They sort of also can stand on their own. And then to the left of Busisekile is Caitlin Stobie, who authored this really special book. I have to tell you, it's a bit like lying in the sun and having the feels when you look up at the clouds and there's just that skin-crawly sensation. A truly mesmerizing collection of short stories called The Smell of Blood and Other Stories, written together with Karis Atelawa. Have I said that correctly?
That's right.
Karis, you just want to maybe wave and say, hi everyone, there's Karis. So Caitlin, who's joining us today, is an author of fiction, poetry, and literary criticism. Her writing has won the Douglas Livingston Creative Writing Competition, the Heather Drummond Memorial Prize for Poetry, the Hammond International Literary Prize, and an Authors Foundation Award. She's a lecturer in creative writing at the University of Leeds, and really, like, those prizes attest to the power of the writing in this book. And then, so to just also say, excuse me, I'm going to do promotion for my publishing house, Caravan Press. Caitlin and Karis and I are in the Caravan Press family, as is Thobeka Yose, who has also just joined this family. So we are growing, and we're mighty, and we're powerful. Yes. We have the best publisher in the world. She couldn't be here today, but yeah, let's. Where's she? She had to go to a memorial. There's been a tragedy here, but she's around. So Thobeka's book, In Silence My Heart Speaks, chronicles her journey as a young woman growing up in a very rural area and her sort of coming into herself. Thobeka has pursued studies in marketing and business. She's pursued her writing journey because the call to write is powerful. She's edited contributions to publications locally and internationally. As the producer of Touchdown with Top Women for Top Radio, she has captured audiences from across the continent. She's also a content manager at, is it Batasia? Yes. And plays an instrumental role in empowering aspiring writers and publishers. So we're talking about these three books today, and I thought that just to give the audience a sense of context, that each of you, because the books, we're talking about the journey of womanhood and how some of that intersects with both pleasure and violence. But I thought because they're so different, it might be interesting to contextualize and just tell us a little bit about the books, as well as the source of inspiration for them. And Busisekile, I know yours, but you can tell the audience.
Hi, everyone. My name is Busisekile, and I'm inspired by money to write my books. That's the biggest inspiration. But so Rubies and Rain is a continuation of Sunshine and Shadows, as you've already mentioned. But in Rubies, we mostly follow Ruby, this girl who is a spoiled princess. She lived a lavish lifestyle. Her daddy was rich, and her mommy died, and so she was acting out and lashing out. And she was also a lesbian, but homosexuality is a crime in Zimbabwe. So she was an undercover lesbian, but then her father, had a boy for her, and Ruby she enjoyed the boy as well. So that makes her bisexual, right? And yeah, so Ruby finds herself in jail, you know. So for someone who was this pampered princess to find yourself thrown in jail with this woman who is almost your same age and is also your father's wife, new wife, who incidentally also slept with your boyfriend. So, so it's an enemies to lovers book, but with a twist, because then it's really about those two women who find themselves locked up in prison unjustly so. They did nothing wrong, but they're just pawns in a political game. And now they find themselves locked in this prison, and they undergo so much trauma that they end up trauma bonded, you know. Imagine your worst enemy now becomes like your hero in a way. So that is Rubies and Rain.
Thank you, Busi. Caitlin?
That sounds great, by the way.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to reading it. The Smell of Blood and Other Stories is a conversation between Karis and myself. And so it's 8 stories that could be read as connected or could be read as their own pieces of work. And Karina, our publisher, was really good with respecting that when we put it together. But there are some characters that have the same names. Karis and I have found so many resonances between ourselves while writing the book, like our mums have the same name and stuff like that. But we met when we were studying in Makanda, and several of the stories in this collection are set at Rhodes University. And for me, at least, speaking about inspiration, the reason why I got in touch with Karis and why we started this conversation was I read a story of hers, Plums, and I was just struck by how she was writing womanhood and writing these experiences that other young women were having at this university, where a lot of very poor behavior, sometimes by lecturers, was not being held accountable. And I thought that there was so much power and braveness in what she was doing, and I wanted to contribute to that as well. I also, on a personal level, wanted to write some stories set in KZN, not Joburg or Cape Town. So it was a fun collection for thinking about outside those areas and exploring our positionality, but also thinking outside of that in those spaces.
Thank you. Do you want to just add a little bit about how the two of you wrote together, how that worked?
Yeah, so initially it was very separate. It was a correspondence, and I think actually when I reached out, I just thought that we would read each other's work and give feedback to each other, which is what we did for years. And then probably sometime during the pandemic, we realized that there was more happening here, and I might have sent a story with someone with the same name as then a story that you were writing, Karis. I'm expecting you to jump up and say, I object at any point, by the way, if I get anything wrong. But it just was very organic, and it just, we fell into this correspondence that then became a manuscript that we then sent out into the world, and thankfully Karina saw how it came together.
I was trying to figure out while I was reading it if I could distill between two voices, and you can't actually, so it's very, very beautifully done. Thobeka, talk to us about this book that covers so many critical themes in our society. What was the inspiration, and just talk to where the book came from.
The book is a love letter to my mom. She was stuck in a very abusive marriage. My father was an alcoholic, and that drove her to mental institution. So it stole my mom from us as her kids, and it also made us feel unseen and covered with a lot of shame because our mother was not as normal as the other mothers. So I wanted the world to know my mom, how strong she is and how beautiful and amazing she is. There was no way I couldn't tell everyone about a force that my mom is. She's 84. It's also my story as well, I also had to face a lot of challenges. I got married at a very young age, and experienced a lot of bullyism and pull head down syndrome, and I was not seen, or I was not accepted by my in-laws, and so I had to add to a voice, to the voices of women who are being abused maybe at work or in their families, and just say, let's be let's do better as the people. And my wish for it is for it to be a mirror for us to see ourselves as, especially as the black women. We tend to pull each other down, and it's a shame.
So your book is this ode to motherhood, but it doesn't shy away from the terrain that is contested, where the experience of mothering can be difficult, but it's also the celebration of when mothering is good and healthy. But you also maybe just wanted to clarify for the audience that, in fact, two mothers in your story, having left your mother's home at a time when she was not managing well, you went to live with your aunt, who also became a mother. Do you want to just say a bit about that?
Yes, I was lucky enough to be removed from a situation that was swallowing me by my grandfather, who took me to my aunt at the age of 9 to raise me. That's when I got to see that what was happening at home was wrong, was indeed wrong. I always knew it was wrong, but I got now to compare the two homes and see that I was right by thinking that what was happening to my mom was wrong. So I was saved by that woman. I think I would be broken today, or an alcoholic as well, if it wasn't for that woman who is my aunt, and her daughters, my cousins. They were way older than me, so they got to nurture me to be a better teenager, a better young woman, to the woman that I am today.
Thank you for sharing that. So I want to start, because the framing for this conversation is around violence, but I don't want to start there. I want to think about the notion of embodiment, that we inhabit our bodies, we move around the world in these bodies, and they change over time. They're not static. They become ill, or they become sites of violence, or they become abled or not abled. But I want specifically for the starting point to be the body as a site of pleasure, because I think that often what we lose, especially as women, in thinking about embodiment as a site of violence, is we shut down the conversation for thinking about the body as a site of the erotica and pleasure. And so, Busi, I'm not going to start with you, because I know you, and we've talked about this before, so you are going to go last here. But Caitlin, let's start with you, and just your thoughts. And, there are moments of beautiful pleasure, bodies and pleasure in your book. Do you want to just speak about that?
Yeah, well, again, I have to start with the first story in the collection, Plums, where Karis wrote so beautifully this relationship between two girls. And you don't know really until the very end that it's an interracial relationship. And also you don't really get at first that it's sexual. And it's just the beauty and the subtlety of how she wrote that was so inspiring. And it made me reflect on my own friendships that I had as a child, my own, these kind of weird homoerotic experiences you have as you're growing up. I mean, the title of the collection is The Smell of Blood and Other Stories. There are quite a few first periods in this, and it's about that time. It's about that time when, you're coming of age and you don't really understand this body that you weren't aware of until 2 weeks ago, and now it's all you can think about, and it's consuming. And we both wanted to capture that in our fiction, that sense of being consumed, that sense of the landscape feels like it's like reflecting what your body is doing. There's one of the stories is called Molehills, and I was thinking about like these very fleshy mounds of earth and the way that your body just suddenly changes. So that was at the forefront of what we were thinking. But yeah, we wanted to capture pleasure as well as pain. And the reason why we went with The Smell of Blood as the title was, Karis actually said this at the launch the other night. She said, I wanted blood to mean something else other than pain, because half the population menstruates, and we deal with blood a lot, and it doesn't have to signify violence.
Just want to say also the book opens on this note of this notion of these, we not say too much, but two young girls, and there's a moment of intimacy, but there's this very powerful metaphor and imagery of them eating these plums, these juicy red plums, and the juice is dripping, and it just sort of heightens the senses and pulls you into the book. Yeah, it's a book you should read, Busi, totes. Thobeka, your book, and I really want to juxtaposition it against all the, because your book is, there's violence is dealt with in such intricate ways. Let's first go to the sites of pleasure. Do you want to maybe also just introduce here your husband, who has since passed on, and how you met? So just turn this off.
My late husband, John Gikaya, I'm a rural girl, so I was walking from the bus stop to fetch a doll that my uncle had sent home. So I had to go to the bus stop and carry that doll.
I had to read that sentence twice, that you carried a doll on your head.
I always say to my young nieces that you don't need to be dressed up for you to meet the love of your life. You don't even choose. So I was carrying a bathroom door from the bus stop, walking from a gravel road, and it was full of dust. So you can imagine my feet and legs, and I met this handsome, gorgeous, and he smelled good and looked good.
It's important. They have to smell good.
Very important. He had a beautiful jawline, the best ever that I've ever seen, and beautiful teeth, and the voice was deep. Not deep, just
Deep enough.
deep enough. So the first thing he did was to take that door from my head, and he put it down, and we had a conversation, and he had seen me before, but it was my first time seeing him, and I just loved how he honored me in a way, how he saw me, how he saw how beautiful I was, and how he took time to want to know me. He had done his research. He was a brilliant man. So he had done his research, and that day was his lucky day to to meet the girl. So he was amazing. I loved how we met and how he pursued me. We didn't go to random dates. It would be trips to the forest or to the river. Not your normal dates, city girls. So I loved how he saw me, and I think at the time I so wanted to be seen, especially by a man, because I had this father wound. My father was disconnected from us. He loved us in his own way, but there was a void, and he filled it. He filled that void, and
It's such a beautiful story. And I want to come back to later this notion of being seen in the world, because as human beings, like, we're fundamentally required to be seen and to be heard. And how sometimes when you shut that down, when you don't see somebody, when you don't hear somebody, like the erasure as a form of slow violence. But Busi, coming to your book, and actually you can kind of join this Rubies and Rain with the thread of the other books and what you're trying to do there. I want to ask you another question, which is, given how you deal with such power with sex and the body in your book, do they sell very well?
Steph, are they selling? But they do, like, people have been very responsive to the books. I believe they do sell. And
there's a market for it, because we need that.
There is, really. And as she was talking about going to the river and whatever, a scene from Rubies and Rain popped in my mind.
Yes,
the waterfall. So I was like, she's not telling us about the pleasure that goes with going to the stream.
Yes. And let me tell you that the river in this book, it gets very, very hot.
Things happen by the river. So, yeah, I think, I like confronting the stereotypes that intimacy is something that is done to women, you know, and not something that women take, you know. I would be calling it the word, but my daughter is behind there, so I can't really say it. But so intimacy in the way you enjoy it, your body can just be a physical act. And there's also, at times, we mistaken being used to someone as, okay, now it's now boring, as what happens with Ruby. So Ruby had a lover. Her first lover was Tendero, right? And Tendero was her first love, the first girl that she experienced intimacy with. And then when she meets this boy, in essence, he breaks her virginity, but he's not her first lover, you know? And she also finds that it's new and it's exciting and it's you know, so now she's questioning if maybe because she also derives pleasure from this source, maybe her body was meant for this source, not that source. And at times it's just, I explore what pleasure is and how you experience it, and try to show the difference between intimacy and just pleasure. That at times you can be intimate with someone and not gain any pleasure, or not gain as much pleasure as with someone where it's just the physical part of it, but there's no intimacy in it, and what that does to you as a woman. And I feel like we don't talk or we are not as descriptive enough as especially African authors, because there's a bit of a stigma towards you know, writing about women enjoying and what they should and should not look for in sex, and so with Rubies and Rain, there's that tension. Also, I use sex as a tool to, like, sort of destabilize the story, because there's a lot of really tough scenes in the book where there's a lot of violence, and then I also then take you back to there's two lovers in a waterfall, and then you sort of forget in that moment, you go to ooh, and then it's back to so I use pleasure in to juxtapose it against the violence of it, to say our bodies can go through so much, and it's funny what we remember and what we forget. Because in that moment of violence, you know, there's a moment where Ruby is now thinking of the pleasure, and how one thing can taint what you enjoyed before, and just one moment you're like, no, now she's thinking no, because when she meets Cheropa for the first time, and she's curious and she's thinking, okay, maybe this is, you know, I enjoy boys more than girls. And then it only takes those two men to actually diminish that, and she's like, no more boys for me, it's now. But really, it's,
And I felt that in the book that you have sort of what's happening to Ruby and Vimbai on the one hand, and it's quite intense, and then the juxtapositioning of Nusikle's story and this romance that unfolds, and that that the two kind of feed off each other. They create a sense of stepping between worlds, but not in a way that is that doesn't flow smoothly. I want to come now to the notion of what I just mentioned in relation to your work, Thobeka. So before we get to violence, this notion of what I think of as slow violence. So Robert Nixon coined this term, slow violence. He used it primarily in relation to the sense of climate justice, that the degradation of the environment has the harshest effect on the poor. And so what we see happening when we eat away, and you have the global north powers who are disproportionately negatively affecting the environment. It's a form of slow violence in terms of how it affects those who are poorest, because they have the least to protect themselves. So by slow violence, in the sense that I'm using it, is not the kind of violence that shows up as scars that manifest on our bodies. It is the emotional and psychological violence that eats away at a sense of self. So when in that power dynamic between two people, you use your power to harm psychologically or emotionally. And Thobeka, let's start with you there. Because you have on the one hand this overt violence, but then the subliminal, like, even the stuff that happens between you and your sister-in-law is it's a form of slow violence. Do you want to just talk about that?
Yeah, before I get into it, talking about sex, you will not believe that in between the fights that my parents had, all the violence that surrounded our family, but I would catch them having sex at night.
Really?
And I'm like, yeah, well, I didn't understand then. I didn't know what it was. But then they would have these moments late at night while they were fighting during the day or in the evening, so early evening. So I couldn't understand that. Yeah. Going back to your question, there was I got attracted to my husband, who is also from a broken family, if I can put it that way. His father was also an alcoholic, but educated family. His parents were both teachers. He had 3 sisters, and he was the last born at home. So I was hoping to at least be treated as a baby. I married young. But to my surprise, it was not like that. I was very, I was in a home that was not welcoming to me, and they were just mean. They would just say things about me in front of me while I'm there. Look at my nose, it's sharp and it's beautiful. But they would say, call me names to make me feel ugly. And they would call me names because of my sharp nose. Their noses are not as beautiful as mine, but they would just...
I'm glad you know it.
Yeah, they would they would gang up against me and lie and say things that I didn't say, and nobody would protect me except for my husband. But at the time, I was a housewife, a young housewife, so my husband was away, and there would be no one to protect me or no one to defend me from those women. You know, those people who would inflict pain on you and then turn around and as if nothing had happened. I was in a situation like that. People would just be mean or decide not to eat my food on that day, and I could not say anything. I could not do anything about it, but stay with them. Women can be cruel to each other. I was in a very, very painful situation that I simply could not take myself out of, because I loved my husband and he loved me. And when he would hear about what had happened, he would try to defend me, but then go away, maybe to Burundi. He worked in the army, he was in the Air Force. He would travel, and then I would be left with these people who would do things that you cannot sit down and address, because you have no one to talk to. You are alone. There's 3 of them against you. Even my mother-in-law, whom I thought would protect me or try and teach them something about acceptance and loving me, she wouldn't do it. But then when they are gone, she would be nice to me. And also because I want peace, I would also forgive her. And it continued for a number of years where women would just be mean to me, and I could not do anything about it.
And when your husband passed away, that was technically the home that you and your child had to revert to, and you were meant to stay there, but you took the very brave decision that was a toxic space for you, and that you were uprooted and moved to Cape Town. Do you just want to briefly tell us about that?
Yes, I saw it, as much as it was painful to lose my husband, but then I saw it as my cue to leave. And also I knew that being a housewife was not my portion. I wanted more for myself, and I wanted a support system, which I knew I could easily receive from my family. So I decided to leave without or having a meeting with anyone. I just knew that I deserve better, and well, maybe they will not notice that I'm gone because they don't see me, they don't acknowledge me as one of their own. So I left, came to Cape Town and started over, took myself to school. I remember there was a time where I would go to work. I got employed, and then on Saturdays I would attend classes and Sundays as well, to a point where my child felt neglected, but I knew that it was for a short time, and I was doing it for the betterment of our lives.
This, your book really is a testimony to this deep-seated sense of drive, and that you're allowed to dream and have ambition and to claim those things for yourself. And just congratulations on all the amazing accomplishments that you drove because you believed. Caitlin, slow violence in your book. There's some particularly haunting scenes.
Yeah, we were talking about this a bit the other night. I think we kind of, I don't want to say egged each other on, but we were kind of inspired by each other to explore difficult moments. And I'm really inspired by what you've just said. I feel resonance with that sense of it's the people who are meant to be closest to you who can let you down the most. And it's the kind of intimacies that go wrong that stick with you and haunt you. And I'm speaking for myself here, but writing these stories was exploring, coming to terms with memories of coming of age, and in a country that's really going through, like period pain, to evoke that novel's title. But I mean, like, it was a strange time growing up in the 90s. It was a strange time for everyone, but particularly when you're coming of age and you're learning about all these different, like your body is going through things, you're trying to navigate relationships, and there's also just always this underlying tensions and violence and some of the writing of these stories was unraveling memories that at the time seemed so normal, but then when you tell them at a party, people don't believe you. And so one of the stories that I wrote is called Butcher Bird, and it was my first time writing in the second person, but I wanted to explore an experience that I witnessed a classmate go through, but I didn't feel was right for me to write about. But on reflection, I realized that many of the students in my class were basically drugged with Ritalin, which was never formally, mediated by anyone. It was just the school librarian would push these drugs onto children, which is medical racism, medical misogyny. No, it's absolutely wild. And I just thought, how many other things like that were happening at a time where, on paper, South Africa has an amazing constitution, but in reality, that's not what happens on the ground. And we all know that. We all know, we've all been in spaces where we hear things or witness things. And so for me, certainly, I wanted to use this collection to explore those uncomfortable moments and hopefully make it relatable for others who might feel the same. And another, going back to, I've mentioned Makanda before, but really it was a case of people pulling you aside and saying, don't be alone in a room with that man. And why is that the way that situation is treated? I think that a lot of this conversation also happened post Me Too, and we never explicitly mentioned this, but certainly for me, I felt like other women were coming forwards and speaking about that violence probably for the first time, and it was the right moment for us to do the same thing.
Yeah. Busi, in your book, before the actual overt violence happens in this prison cell with Vimbai and Ruby, there's this prolonged period of what the men do in terms of the psychological games that they play. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so it's before the overt violence, as you're saying, they would be deprived of toiletries, sanitary pads, and they weren't given a toilet, so they just had to do whatever they had to do on a soiled tin there that wasn't changed. And then it's all of those things that are actually happening in Zimbabwean prisons. I remember there was once an inquiry about the state of Zimbabwean prisons, especially when you consider women. And so at times when we look at the violence meted out to women, it's never always explicit. There are some things that women should never be deprived of, like sanitary pads. It should be something that is automatically there for you as a woman, because you undergo this natural stage of every month you have your menses and you should have this. And so you find that in depriving you, that's another form of violence where you're being treated as an animal, or you're treated as undeserving, and you're told you smell, you do this, you do that, but you're not given enough, hygiene. You're not given enough soap to bath and all that other stuff. And also considering the mental state of the girls, Yes. And it was interesting to see Ruby now becoming the stronger one, whereas Vimbai was always the one who was a brass. She was very, she stood on business, But when she's now in the cell, she's slowly losing her mind. She has schizophrenia, so the voices are sort of taking over, and she's denied her medicine, she's denied her. So at times, violence isn't always the physical act, but also just the mental, how you're treated, being shut away, being told, being deprived of your essentials, not being allowed to speak, and the way they were arrested as well, to say, okay, and to the world, these girls, it's like that thing where they're saying, no, we don't have them in prison, yes, but they are actually in prison. So it's an ongoing humanitarian law thing in Zimbabwe. It's actually a real concern where people either just disappear, or we have the three ladies, actually, one was an MP. They were stopped in a roadblock, and apparently they were arrested after going on a march. They were arrested, and they claimed that they were sexually assaulted, and among a lot of other things. And then what happened after they came out with what happened to them, the government arrested them for lying against the government about their experiences. And the MP actually had to undergo mental health because she actually her mental state did deteriorate. And so it's a lot of violence that happens to women, even politically, and when you are further victimized after that, to say you are lying, you know, it's sort of like gaslighting. You're being gaslit to say, no, you are lying, this didn't happen to you, but you know that it happened to you. And it's sort of what a lot of women go through, like when you speak up about any form of violence or any form of abuse, you are questioned. You are the one who's put on trial, not the person who abused you, not the person who, you know, took advantage of you. You're asked, what were you doing at the party to be drugged?
Yeah,
what were you doing? Yes, what were you wearing? What were you, why were you, you know, if your in-laws abuse you, why were you not respectful enough to them? Yes, why were you speaking back? So it's a lot of, yeah.
And you captured that so beautifully, the notion of institutional violence, that even, you know, within this political context, it's actually very real. You're telling a story, but it's a real thing that actually happens. I should open for questions, but I want to just connect some very unbaked ideas in looking at trauma and the links between all of your books, actually, in very different ways, cover issues of the construction of identity and sexual orientation, and the connection to trauma and violence. And Thobeka, if again, sorry to start with you, but yours is a very specific one in relation to your daughter, and in your daughter coming into womanhood in a cultural context that was not very supportive. Like your husband's family was very critical and harmful in terms of coming to terms with your daughter's transitioning. Do you want to speak a bit about that?
Yeah, it was very difficult to find out. I gave birth to a boy who later came out on Facebook to say he was gay, and then later said he is trans woman, and started transitioning socially without talking to me or to anyone. It was sort of, she was not apologetic about it, wanted to be addressed as she. Started dressing as a girl, braids and everything. And it was difficult for me. I did not like, I felt alone because nobody especially from her side of family, wanted to be there to be supportive. The question that was asked was that, do you still stay with Lwetu? And that felt so offensive. How can you ask a mother if she still stays with her child? So already it painted me as an absent mother who is not there for their child, and now the child has changed into something they don't know, and they were not about to be associated with that. And I was told that we cannot be a part of that. Tell him that he is hurting us, and by saying he's gay at the time.
Yes.
And we cannot be, our name cannot be dragged to such. I didn't even know, but yeah, a lot was said in that phone call from my sister-in-law, and I got home and confronted Lwetu, who was not ready to talk to me about it. I asked, what have you posted on Facebook? And she said, nothing controversial. And that was it. So I had to do my own, ask my friends, because I was blocked by Lwethu on Facebook. I could not see anything. So I had to ask friends to help me find out what is it that Lwethu has posted on Facebook. And then even after finding out, I had to wait for her to be ready to tell me. But to cut a very long story short, they have accepted Lwethu, especially the extended family. They have accepted her as her, and had reintroduced her to her people, her ancestors, as Lwethu now, who is a girl. It has been a long journey, a lonely journey, because there are things that you cannot even tell your friends because you don't want, you are afraid of the things that they are going to say.
Yes.
So you end up suffering in silence because deep down you want back, you want your boy, but you cannot say it because that will be opening a room for people to feed you with their opinions, of which the situation now is that Lwethu says she is a girl.
Do you know, I do have to open because I've got a signal for questions, but what I wanted to say is what I found particularly magical about how you dealt with this is at the outset, there was just you kind of holding this, right? And you holding all the tension of how might your child get hurt by the family. But what is magical is that, to me, it's an illustration of how culture is not static. We always talk about culture as if it's this holy grail that cannot be changed. But there's this beautiful ceremony where you go and you visit the grave and the family rejoices and celebrates this new girl coming into the family. And it's such a testimony to how we have power to change our social norms and our values and to change culture, because it must change over time to be more inclusive and receptive to people, and to respect kind of human rights. I really wanted to hear from the two of you too, but I do have to take questions from the audience. Are there questions, comments from the audience? Yes.
Hi, ladies. Thank you for a very fascinating topic on violence and how it affects women. I'm curious to hear about the transition of mental health.
Yes.
In terms of different generations, because in the generations of our mothers, Thobeka talked about her mother who's 84, who went through her own trauma. That age generation probably didn't define it as mental health, but they had issues. So how have you dealt with the transitioning of mental health and how it's talked about and how it's dealt with up to today, where you're talking about a child who's now saying I'm a she and no longer a he? And from any of the authors, I'm just curious about the treatment of mental health generationally.
Each of you deal with mental health in your book, so please do all take a turn to go.
Actually, I think we talked about that a bit in the morning as well, over mental health, whereby I was saying that a lot of things have always been here in Africa, but even before colonialization, and then suddenly they were given another name, but we understood them differently. Like for ages, if you were gifted spiritually, bekuthiwa uyahlanya or uluhlanya, which means you have mental illness per se. And it's something that has always been there, and how it was dealt with before and how it's dealt with now creates that room for stigma. To say now we view mental health as a white thing. I don't know when we got to that point or where we got to that point to say if you have or if you're suffering from mental illness, it means you are westernized or you are soft or you are. And so when we write and when I'm writing about mental health, I try to bring in even the aspect of African spirituality, whereby if a woman loses a baby, in the African sense, you're supposed to undergo a cleansing. And it's not just a physical cleanse. It was also meant for you as a mother to accept that there was a spirit that was attached to you, and that spirit now must be set free, or for it to move on to another dimension. And so in my writing, I bring in those aspects of saying, okay, this girl, she suffered, Vimbai in the book, she suffered from a miscarriage. When she was younger, she didn't even know she was pregnant, and now she's pregnant again, and is suffering from a complicated pregnancy that is also affecting her mental health. And when the doctors cannot find anything that is triggering her mental health, to say, okay, we don't understand these complications, one suggests to say, we are African people. Why don't we actually view it from a lens of bring in a healer to say, and the healer does come in and say, you didn't get cleansed. So the spirit of your child is now, affecting. So these things, mental health and everything, it's not something new. And it's been there through generations and generations. But it's only now that we are giving these things new names and making it seem as if it's different, or maybe now we're talking about it. But it's always been something that has been there from generation to generation, but we just give it new name. And somewhere, somehow along the line, in the naming, we also create stigma. So I believe that if we are to destigmatize it, we have to go back to, okay, this thing has been there. What was it called before? How was it dealt with before? How can we deal it with now that will, also offset, yeah.
Yeah, to bounce off what's just been said, I think that you're right that there's so many depictions, amazing depictions in African feminist literature of what is intergenerational trauma. Like Yvonne Vera does it beautifully, so many other writers, and it's not branded that way, but it's there. So in a way, we're just working in that tradition. But also thinking about like how we think about, mental health and how we frame it now. For our collection, at least, a large part of it was there is this huge divide between our parents' generation and the kind of the 90s. We have a lot of Facebook stuff happening in our stories, like it's a different generation. And Karis wrote the story, What Ma Says. And because it's everything, it's the repeated refrain of Ma says this, Ma says that. And it just so cleverly and neatly, it's the shortest story in the collection. It's only like 2 pages. But 2 pages just show you exactly what's messed up. Like exactly what's going wrong there from a child's perspective. It's beautiful. And I would just like to add about the conversation about trans and gender identity. The final story that I wrote for the collection is about my sister who's trans and is called Cis. And it was really a response to a quote by a transgender author, Mackenzie Walk, who said, I wish that cisgender women could write about us as sisters. And that really stuck with me because my sister, I was the first person she came out to. And I just sat with that for a long time thinking, how do I approach that story without making it mine, and how do I, like you said, it's tough being a family member who has to learn a new name and new preferences and new, but also it's not tough. It's really not. Like, you will always choose love in that situation.
Yes. Yeah.
And so going through that process was really powerful. And that quote, like, I wish we could be viewed as sisters. I think that's beautiful. Yeah.
Thobeka.
I always, when I think about my mother's mental issues, I always think that maybe there was no language for what she was suffering from then. Nobody knew what was wrong with her. And when you behave in a certain way with that we are not used to, we will say in isiXhosa uligeza, you are just a mad person. But I think what if my mom was suffering from postnatal depression because she had twins after me. I was 3 years old and her mental health started getting worse after that. And what if she was misdiagnosed by maybe saying she is schizophrenic. Maybe it was something else. There are so many layers surrounding the mental health, and I think nowadays maybe we deal with them in a better manner than that time. And yeah, we also as Black people have this thing of saying you are suffering from, if you are depressed, it's a white people's thing. Like my child, Luetu, was a cutter, and when my mom would say, yo, where do you see these things? You watch too much television. Also, Thobeka, this thing of yours of taking your child to a white school. It's a lot. There are a lot of things that we don't talk about as Black people, that make this thing of mental illness or our mental wellness. We do not give it enough attention, and I'm grateful for people like us now who are talking about it, because we are raising more awareness and we are having conversations like this one, so that we can do better as society in terms of understanding what people go through.
And there's also the connection between that and kind of social justice issues. So there's a book that is available downstairs that I'm just blatantly promoting called Starving for Social Equity, where I took young, predominantly Black writers who wouldn't ordinarily get published to tell us a story about social equity in this country. And what was frightening is that most of those young people came back with stories of violence, but in there's a young girl who has anorexia in a really bad way, and her essay is titled that anorexia is a white person's disease. So it's not something that we suffered from, supposedly. But there is the issue around access to resources and mental health. Like when you living in like, you know, I've just been looking at the story of Tulani, where children and malnutrition, the rate has gone up by 287% in the last 5 years. So when you talk about the daily struggle of putting food on the table, you know, where in the line then are the resources for managing our mental health, which is pivotal to everything, to how we show up in the world. Technically, I'm supposed to close, unless there's the person dying with a question. And like, yes, okay, there you are. Okay.
Good afternoon, ladies. I've just got a quick question in terms of culture and how we view it as a static thing. I mean, and I'm thinking around violence that sometimes is even ascribed as a part of culture. When we look at how, you know, we do things in our everyday lives, and these are things that when we read up and we research, it's violent, you know, a mother beating their child, and we're like, no, but this is part of discipline. This is normal, you know, and we say it's cultural. If you don't hit the child, you're spoiling them. It's cultural, you know. And then when life changes, then we go, yeah, but something is wrong. Something's happening. Children are now going to get out of hand. How do we address these, and even social justice, inequality, poverty, racism, these are things that are normalized. There are certain acts that are entrenched in the culture that when we say, but let's undo this, people say, no, but you can't touch that. And you find that undoing that becomes a step towards ending this inequality, ending this injustice. So yeah, I think my question is, how do each of you see us overcoming that we can't touch this because it's cultural, and even in things that are not cultural?
I think
if you can all just
I think
do concluding comments.
Okay.
We remedy that by talking about these things. adding to the voices that are already out there who are talking about it, voicing it out, talking about it, and until somebody hears us, because there's a lot of there are a lot of injustices that going on in the name of culture. For example, I felt violated when they cut my hair when I lost my husband. They cut my hair in the name of culture without telling me why were they cutting and burning my hair. So I think talking about these things constantly so that people know, because these things can be changed. The culture, we need to evolve.
And also I feel like some of the things aren't even culture, right? So I feel like a lot of times, especially when you look at what is termed culture, it's just someone's a social construction, you know? And if you raise the other side of it, like for instance, if you say a woman, they say we're not supposed to cheat, but culturally, whatever child is born of a woman in wedlock belongs to the husband, right? Even if it's the neighbor's child. If you bring that up, men will tell you there's no such culture because it works against them.
Yes.
And I've found that a lot of times what is termed culture is, it's almost like religion, right? A lot of times how we interpret religion or culture is usually based on our bias, on our prejudice, and what works for us. You know, so if I want to justify hitting my child because I cannot reach the resolve of talking to my child and actually disciplining her by talking to her, I'll be like, no, you can't spare the rod, spoil the child. That's in Matthew, what, because I'm trying to, now I'm trying to justify why I am violent to my child, you know. I don't want to confront that part of me that is broken enough to want to break this child. You know? Yes. So a lot of things are not culture. They are not religion, but they're rather people's justifications of why they are vile. And they do this, and it's harder to confront if I say, no, but in my culture, you know, because now it's like you can't question it. It's in my culture. It's my culture. Yeah.
What you just said about like the broken parts of myself, or I think that really resonates. And for me, it would just be very simply and quickly like question yourself and then question yourself again. Like whatever the default reaction is, question it twice.
So in conclusion, when you're not thinking about the broken parts in yourself, please go down and buy these 3 books. Also, Striving for Social Equity and Support Young Writers, which is the... Thank you, Erika, my PR person. Thank you. You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you to the Open Book team.